welcome back. As I mentioned in the last video, we blew the head gasket on the Mustang. So in this video, we are going to kind of look over the damage some, talk about the events that happened, talk about options going forward. Maybe I can get some feedback from some of you guys on what I should do with this engine. So first off, let's just do the timeline of events for the Autocross. I ran in the first heat, Ashley ran in the second heat. So during my heat, I was getting some oil coming out on the dipstick on the driver's side. So I've suspected for a little while that the rings are starting to go on this engine, is putting out blue smoke during like the launching, but it wasn't that bad. I was hoping that I'd be able to make it through the rest of this season and then try to figure out what to do, or maybe even push it a little bit longer. But yeah, I was getting oil coming out on this side. I was cleaning it up. Also found that the dipstick whole tube was loose in the block. So we were able to get that tightened up by my last run, but I was still kind of getting oil coming up the dipstick, even though the dipstick was all the way fully seated. Maybe there's an O-ring bad on there or something, but I'm thinking that there was or is blow by going past the cylinders and pressurizing the crankcase and shooting oil out the dipstick. The PCV valve is good. I had checked that earlier. I do have a catch can on there and it does have some oil in it, but it's not a lot, so I don't really know. I'm also getting a little bit of oil out of the breather on the passenger side, so that also is telling me that there's probably the rings are kind of going bad and getting a lot of blow by. So also during my heat, they came up to me and said that there was some white smoke coming out of the exhaust while driving on track. I didn't really think too much of it at the time. I thought maybe it was the traction control kicking in or something else. Didn't really think anything of it at the time. So in between first and second heat, I completely removed the dipstick out of the car and found a bolt, put that in the block to completely solve the oil problem. I didn't want oil coming out anymore for Ashley's running because it was coming out and hitting on the exhaust. Bad news. That could have been a fire. So completely eliminated that so she could get her runs in. Everything was going really well. No signs of any issue during her run. So no oil problem, no white smoke, no problems at all until her fifth run. Halfway through the course, it just put out a big puff of white smoke, and then she started driving really slowly. So good on her to recognize that there was an issue with the engine, that it did not sound right, it did not feel right, and she babied it to the finish line and off the course. If there was a catastrophic issue, she should have stopped, but the engine was still running. If there was a catastrophic issue, the engine would have probably stopped. So debate whether or not to just stop the car and check things out or to continue slowly off the course. And then she did the right thing. She slowly got it off the course. Once she came off course, it was just a lot of white smoke pouring out of both exhaust tailpipes. So at that point, I knew the head gasket had blown. White smoke is head gasket, is coolant being burned from the head gasket being blown. The engine was also not sounding too greatest, but it was still running just fine. So I told her to limp it back to the trailer and we'll get it loaded up as quickly as possible. So that kind of leads us to where we are today. So I have pulled all the spark plugs out to try to take a look at them, try to figure out what was going on. I was going to do a compression check, but after pulling all the spark plugs and turning the engine over, we got coolant shooting out of two of the cylinders. So we know where the head gasket is blown at. It is on cylinder 2 and cylinder 3. Most of it's coming out of cylinder 2, but a little bit is coming out of cylinder 3. Let's take a look at these spark plugs because they're kind of interesting. So they are new. As you saw a couple of videos ago, I had just installed them. So they're maybe like a month or so old. They only got 2 events on them, so not very many miles on them. So here's a look at the spark plugs that came out of the engine. I got them all labeled here, so 1 through 4, 5 through 8 on this side, so front of the engine, back of the engine. This guy right here doesn't look like it had fired at all. So these were new, installed, would have like 2 vents on them. So really interesting what was going on there. So when I tear down the new engine, the fuel injectors, I'll send them off to get all tested to make sure the fuel injectors are all good. I've checked the spark plug wires, they all ohmed out good. So maybe this one is just a dud, or maybe something was going on. I also found that the boot was a little bit loose, so maybe it just wasn't making good contact. These 2 were wet when I took it out, and when I cranked it over, these are the 2 that the coolant came out on, mostly from number 2, but 3 also had a little bit of coolant though it came out on it. All these other ones look pretty good. This guy here is running pretty rich. I'm not really sure what was going on, and it kind of matches up with number 2 over here, so I don't know if something was going on with these ones to be running rich. So it's something that I will just need to check out. Hopefully it comes back that the injectors were kind of screwed up. All right, so I've drained all the coolant. It looks pretty good. I've pulled the dipstick. The oil still looks really good. So I don't think there was any cross-contamination going on. So I'm pretty sure that the bottom end of the engine is still decent. It's obviously not good as we're getting blow by, but the bearings did not get destroyed during the head gasket going. So I believe I could reuse the crankshaft if I had choose to. All right, so what are we going to do for the time being? The car cannot be down. We got a championship that we are fighting for. We got autocrosses that we need to go to. So we need to get the car back up and running as quickly as possible. If you recall, a whole year ago, we put another engine in. We took the one that was in the car, took it out, put another one in. That was the quickest way to get more power, to get the modifications done that I wanted to and get them onto the car. So I just bought a whole engine that was had all the parts ready to go, ran, everything was good. So we put that engine in, and I took the old one and it's just been sitting over off to the side. I had to steal a few parts from it, so I hadn't put it up for sale yet. I was actually just getting ready to get it all kind of put back together and get it listed for sale right before this engine blew. Unfortunately, I still have that engine, and that one will be going back into the car to get the car back up and running. It is one that I know works. I've ran it in the car for like 10 years, a little over 10 years. So I know it works, it's good to go. So it will go into the car to get us back out racing and to get the championship that we're going for. It won me the championship last year, so I have no doubt that it will do just the same thing this year. So before we talk about future plans for this engine or just future plans of an engine in the car, let's talk about what I think might have happened to this one to blow the head gasket. It didn't overheat. I don't think that caused it. That's a common problem to cause the head gasket to blow, is overheating. The car didn't overheat. So another thing that could have happened was maybe detonation going on. I don't have a huge confidence in the tune. It ran all right. I did not get it tuned. The previous owner did not get it dyno tuned. He had it tuned from a shop, but it sounded like it was more like a mail order tune, even though it was a local shop, but it was not dyno tuned. So the tune could have done it. It could have had too much timing for the fuel that I was running, and it just blew the head gasket. Another thought is maybe the heads, the bolts loosened up a little bit, or they needed to be retorqued after a heat cycle maybe. I'm not really sure. So that's one thing. I will check that. I think when I pull it off, I'll go and check the torque on all the head bolts just to see if any of them are actually loose. Other than that, I don't know. I'm really thinking that it's the tune just having maybe too much timing or something. I'm not really sure. I'm not a tuner. I did look over the tune to make sure that it was kind of viable, but I didn't make any changes to it. So I just ran it as is. All right, future plans. They're still up in there. I don't know what I'm gonna do with this engine at the moment. I'm kind of leaning towards just a cheap rebuild, like do maybe a 306, try to reuse the stock crank, maybe the rods, and put new pistons with rings. So just do a good refresh. This wasn't really planned into the budget. Like I said, I bought this engine last year. I spent a lot of money on it then, hoping that it would give me several years of good running. So this is kind of really unplanned. So I kind of want to do it maybe cheaper just to get a nice fresh rebuild, because the engine should be making in the 3 to maybe 330 horsepower, which is plenty to move this 3,000 to 3,100 pound car on the course. You don't really need high horsepower a lot of times for autocross. It is useful in some of the places where you can actually get a little straight and hammer it, but for the most part, you don't need a lot of horsepower. You need to be able to handle and get the power down. So having a lower end torque is really helpful. So one idea to get lower end torque is to do potentially a stroker. So either do like a 331 or a 347 stroker, which would then need a new crank and rods and pistons. So I have done a 347 in the past. I don't think I would do one quite for a reliable autocross car. I know that they've had oiling problems. A lot of that has been fixed nowadays, but I don't want to risk that. So I'm leaning more towards like a 331. I've never done a 331, so that would still get having a little bit lower end torque, higher power potential, all out of the same size engine package. So that is one thing for doing a stroker. 331 or a 347 are the same price essentially, because you got to buy a whole new bottom end. So they're actually the same price, which is why I did a 347 earlier, because there was no use in spending the amount of money and getting a smaller engine. But now I think it would be more advantageous to have the 331 size instead. Another option for keeping the same engine would be to add a supercharger. So that's one option that I'm actually really considering, is maybe do the 306, so do a cheap rebuild, and then in the future, not right away, but in the future, do like a supercharger, and that would get the power over what the other options are even considering right now. So over the power potential of a 331, a 347, over the 351, it should be, you know, in the high 4s to 500 horsepower range of keeping low boost to keep that stock block intact. Once you start getting around 500, stock block is questionable. But it all depends also on the tune. So anything that is going in at this point is gonna go and get dyno tune. I am not using any other tunes or mail order tunes or anything like that. It's gonna go get dyno tune, so I know everything is perfect and correct. There's also more radical things you could do. I could do a complete engine swap. So I've looked a little bit into like a 351 Windsor. So that's a much bigger engine. Physically, it does fit in the car, but our hood clearance would be questionable. Some other clearance would be questionable, and it's not any cheaper, I think, than doing the stroker on the current engine, because I could go get a 351 like from the junkyard probably and slap it in, but there's all the swap parts that you got to do. Oil pan, headers, intake, a few other things like that. The balancing is different, so I need a new flywheel. And then the bottom end is still questionable since it's an engine from a junkyard. But that is one option that would be really cool, to have a 351 Windsor. So still push rod, still sounds awesome, still has the torque, just a lot more power potential out of it. And then the other option, the other swap option that a lot of people have been asking or telling me to do, other than an LS, I'm not putting a Chevy into a Ford, is a Coyote swap. Coyote swap would be really awesome, but it is also very expensive. So yes, you could go try to find a junkyard engine, which is cheaper, but you still have all the swap parts that have to go into it. So a new K-member, a new exhaust, new transmission, new ECU and harness, and all kinds of things that kind of go into doing a Coyote swap. And it's just not in the budget right now. I'd rather be taking the money and putting it into the front suspension of the car. That is a place that is more suited for the money to go, which is one reason that I'm kind of going away from the stroker kit and doing like just a stock rebuild with a potential supercharger down the line. So then I'd be able to save some money right now, put money into the front suspension that I was kind of already starting to budget into it in this off season. Maybe down the line we could do a Coyote swap or some other kind of swap to as a cool factor and to get more power out of the car. But at this point, I'm really leaning towards just a 306 stock rebuild. Still weighing the 331 stroker rebuild. So we'll see how all of those things kind of go. Those are things that I'm thinking out about. So any feedback that you guys have on those options, I know a lot of people love the Coyote swap, want to see a Coyote swap. I just don't think I can justify it at this moment. Yeah, so those are all the options that I'm kind of just going over, trying to weigh. I do have a budget that I have to try to maintain. As some of you are probably aware, that this is all being funded by me. I'm not getting any money from YouTube at this moment. So if you do like these videos and want to see more, want to just help me out, hit that subscribe button. I'd really appreciate it. It will help me out once I get up to the subscriber count that is needed. And I can start putting more into this build and into other builds that I will be having. So as I said, I'm going to be pulling this engine out, putting the old one back in. So I need to go get working on that. So in the next video, we'll probably be going kind of over that kind of progress of that engine, the few things that I have to change in order to put it back in and get it running, like the tune and things like that. And hopefully it's sitting for a year, hasn't done any damage to it. It's still working perfectly, hopefully. And then in the next videos also, we will be tearing into the engine, pulling it all apart, trying to figure out exactly what may happen to it to blow the head gasket and the rings and things like that. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you guys in those future videos.